So a lot of the messages I put out now, I'm very aware that they contradict some of what I said, say, on the first War mixtape in 2004. I'm not in denial about that. It is what it is. I can't pretend I still feel the same way I felt. Then the use of the word nigger is a very prime example. Something that was all over my first mixtape, all over my first album, hasn't been on any of my records since. That wasn't an accident. That was a very conscious decision. I started doing a certain amount of reading. And it was one particular conversation I had. I was already on my way to saying, you know, what am I really doing? Particularly being that my mum's white, you know, and my dad's black. And if I started using the word honky and cracker as much as I used to use the word nigger, nobody would be entertained by it. That occurred to me amongst other things. But then I had a conversation with one of my elders, a guy called Toyin. He was a Yoruba brother. And he just looked at me and said, young brother, you're better than that. And from that day on, I just said, you know, he's right. If I were to use it, it would be in the only context that it deserves to be, and that's people who were trying to dehumanize a particular group of people. This idea that you can reclaim the word and it's a term of bollocks. As far as I'm concerned, it's complete and utter rubbish. That we can reclaim what is arguably the bloodiest word in human history. And so all of that, I suppose, this kind of things I talk about now and the kind of message I'm trying to put out, the kind of challenges, is all just a process of someone who's been really incredibly lucky. I've probably been to 30 countries in the last decade, you know, that I hadn't been to when I made the first War mixtape. To pretend that standing in a favela in Brazil and boys around you with machine guns and hand grenades and they just want to make you a drink doesn't change who you are, do you know what I mean? Pretending that the police pushing a gun in your face when you're coming out of a favela late at night, you know, taking off the safety. And the only reason maybe they didn't shoot you was because they heard the English accent coming out your mouth. It's like, it changes who you are, and if it doesn't, you're a damn fool. You know what I mean? And I found out something a couple of days ago about the phrase niggers in Paris while we're at it. There's a book called Medical Apartheid, which is about the history of experimenting on African Americans in medicine. And the phrase niggers in Paris, or Negroes in Paris, refers to a phenomenon. I haven't actually read the passage, my friend was explaining to me, so I'm going to go and check this out for myself, but my friend was explaining to me the passage. It refers to a time in the 40s and 50s when African Americans en masse were going to Paris to bleach their skin, because the bleaching products weren't yet available so widely in America. So that phenomenon was referred to by academics as Negroes in Paris, just so you know. So go and check out the book Medical Apartheid, because I do want to make it clear I haven't read that page for myself, but my friend was explaining to me it, so I don't want to get quoted like, and he's wrong. But read the book and decide for yourself. But anyway, sorry, because there's like 7 zillion ways rappers have told us we can kill other black people, you know? So I just feel like, because people say that to me, yeah, well, you know, it's all that deep shit, and that's what I like to take the piss out of. It's like one person raps about being smart a little too much, and then he's going on, he's trying to be deep. But 7 million dudes rap about, and they're very specific, let's be clear, they're not rapping about being violent full stop. They're rapping about how many niggers they kill, right? That's cool, you can do that a zillion times, and we've normalized it so much we don't even question it. There's nowhere else in the world where anyone of any other color was told, you can't come in here because you're a nigger. There's nowhere in the world white people or Asian people were not allowed to sit on a bus because they were niggers, or where they were thrown overboard, or where we can say this and we can justify it, but I promise you, we're just kidding ourselves. And people look at us like we're clowns because we still call each other this. We can tell ourselves that's not the case.
Yeah, but it's not only black people. Like black people call other races of people.
Because we're that stupid. not because it's okay. Because we've taken this word, and I'm not cussing. I used to do it, you know. So I'm not saying I'm not cussing.
I don't do it.
I'm saying this is something I used to do. So it's not like I'm judging no one who's 18, 19 doing it. It's just because they don't understand. If I gave them 5 books to read, I've given a room full of boys and I've showed them pictures of lynchings and they don't want to use the word no more. They think of it a whole different. But they didn't know what a lynching was when it started. So they're using this word and they actually have no idea that human beings used to be barbecued in public, and this word was the justification and put on postcards, and it was sent as it was entertaining because they were this word. Do you understand? Whereas if youths are not being told that today, they just think it's a song that they've heard in a 50 Cent record. You know, if we presented them, cool, this is the word that's being used, but by the way, this is what the blood attached to it, now you make a decision. I would put money on it. People educated that way from young wouldn't want to use the word. But we can't say it applies to everyone else because it just simply does not. It used to apply to Indians as well. They used to call Indian people that word. So maybe that argument could be made, but it can't be made that it applies to anybody else. I think that when we talk about race, we tend to focus on individual acts of prejudice, which is why UKIP often come up, because they'll overtly say stuff that we find offensive. But unfortunately, the issue of race, if we understand it, is a lot more insidious. And it takes a lot more of a historical view to understand the difference between individual bias and structural racism and privilege. And the idea of Great Britain was intimately tied to the fact that Britain's invaded almost every country on the earth. And so the idea of our greatness was intimately tied
to this idea of empire, which was intimately tied to what Rudyard Kipling calls the white man's burden, to go and civilize all these stupid brown folks that have been writing and having civilizations for thousands of years. But let's forget all of that. So if we fast forward to today, when we talk about structural racism in Britain, do we have the same institutional disparities in rates of imprisonment that they have in America? Yes, absolutely we do. Do we have the same disparities in terms of who's dying in police custody? Yes, indeed we do. In 2011, we were told we loved Libyans so much we wanted to bomb democracy into them. Less than 5 years later, we're leaving people fleeing the same conflict to drown in the sea, while giving a woman space in a national newspaper to refer to them as cockroaches. And when you refer to humans as cockroaches, that is a mandate for murder. Let's be clear about that. The moment human beings become non-human, that is a mandate for murder, and there's a long historical parallel of that. Today, Germany, the country that bombed this country, in our grandparents' lifetimes, so theoretically the grandchildren of Nazis can get in and out of England easier than the grandchildren of people from the Commonwealth who fought against the Nazis. And where do they come from? When we talk about immigrants, do we mean people from Australia and New Zealand? Didn't Boris Johnson go to Australia and say, hey, we're culturally the same? White people have such a different way of classifying themselves that white immigrants are expats and non-white immigrants are immigrants. So when we say immigrants, if we go to border control, we can go there, Yarlswood, and we go and look at who's there. It's not a bunch of white people from New Zealand. So we have structural forms of privilege and bias that are much more insidious and much more difficult to overcome. The reaction to Africans and Asians coming here post-World War II, to rebuild the country after the Queen's German cousins bombed it, the reaction to them was one of general hatred. It's illogical. These people who had formerly been colonized by Britain had fought in both world wars. India gave 2.5 million volunteers, for those who don't know. When we talk about being saved by America in the war, we want to talk about being saved by India and Russia. That would be a bit more accurate, but that's a bit inconvenient. But the reaction to those people and their descendants has been one that is about structural bias and privilege. The greatest metaphor for this might be Canary Wharf and Tower Hamlets. Sure. If you look at that predominantly Bengali community that has to look at Canary Wharf every day, how many of those people work in Canary Wharf other than to clean toilets? There's bias and bigotry everywhere in the world. The country my grandparents come from, it's pretty much generally accepted that they don't like gay people. But what's interesting, race even plays a role in that. In Jamaica, we have disgraceful homophobia. No one ever says it's because of Christian fundamentalism. Because even though it is justified in explicitly Christian fundamentalist terms, because only Muslims do bad stuff because of their religion, because we know almost all the Muslims in the world are brown. Whereas when a German wings pilot crashes and kills 150 people deliberately, or the man in Norway killed nearly 90 people, I was in Australia when that happened. This is how uniform the agreement is that white people will be portrayed differently. The Australian media referred to Andres Breivik as having terrorist-like tactics. I mean, to think about that. Yeah. This guy killed almost 100 people, and he's just almost a terrorist. The idea that white is right isn't just a European idea, it's an idea that has had insidious implications, because no matter what, the 700 people that were left to drown off the coast of the Mediterranean, were they white human beings, they wouldn't have been left to drown. And they certainly wouldn't be called cockroaches.
Yeah, so what you have is very privileged, usually middle-class Americans saying, oh, if you just do this and do that and just think positive, well, for you, born into a society built on genocide and slavery and reaping all the benefits of that, it's very easy to say, oh, if you just attract into your life wealth, you will have it. Nonetheless, there are certain habits you can develop that are useful to you in whatever environment you're in. That I do agree with, but pretending that that's the whole story is rubbish. And so for me, I was fortunate. I had very radical parents, both my mum and my dad. Even though I grew up with my mum, and I saw my dad on weekends and holidays and whatever else. When I think about it now, they're both politically very radical, right? And so they encouraged me from very young to question everything, even them. Actually, they didn't always like it, but having parents that gave me that sense that authority wasn't beyond recourse. It wasn't my way or the highway. Put up or shut up. Children should be seen or not heard. It was like, so what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Blah, 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 right? And my parents both had difficult times in school. They were from very difficult, very troubled backgrounds that could have turned them into the kind of people that were like, oh, my kids are doing well. You know, this happens where parents become resentful of their children even. And I don't mean that as a slight to parents. It's real. If all your life goals have been frustrated by a society, right? And then you see your children bucking those trends, your insecurity might make you pull them back and want less for them and squash them. And all of those things happen between even people that love each other. My parents didn't do that, neither of them. They both were like, I want my children to see things that I never saw, to go places that I never went, to live almost vicariously through their children. And I feel like, I mean, it's not just my older sister. I've got a younger sister, younger brother who's
just travelled the world. He's a cruiserweight boxer. He does loads of other things, has many skills. He can fix anything. He does decorating. He's a multiple skill guy. I've got another younger sister who's a carer. I've got another younger sister who's a professional stunt woman. And she's done big films as well. Like, she's done stunts in very, very big production films. So it's like, we're not all same mum, same dad, but I feel like in our family there was a certain radicalism and a certain culture present that gave most of us the tools and the equipment to be prepared for the kind of society that we would face. So no, we would have to work twice as hard. That's normal. Like 10 times as hard. That's normal. But on top of that, to understand what the game was and to maybe have the support to think a bit more entrepreneurially. Because my mum and dad they weren't even together when I was born. They'd split up by then. So I didn't grow up in a traditional married family. So I haven't had the same pressures of you must marry this person from this rank and you must marry up into a better family that are adopted. My mum was just like, yo, if you love someone, boom, do your thing. Yeah, I don't really business. Same with my dad. So there are a lot of those pressures that can even come actually with middle class families that make people make decisions that are probably not in their best interest. There's nothing wrong with going to uni and getting a job if that's what you want to do. But if you wanted to become a graphic designer or a novelist or any of those things, I've seen this where grown adults still wanting their parents' approval choose to go and become doctors and lawyers because their parents said so. And they don't want to be doctors and lawyers. And actually for their mental and spiritual well-being, it was a poor decision. And even for their financial well-being. Talented people who probably could have been amazing at something different, but even in a middle class environment, those kind of bully, which is what I think it is to a degree, you know, your parents bullying you to become one career or other. I'm not knocking parents, you know, I get it. In a capitalist society, you're defined by what you are, what you do, what you have. I'm not blaming the parents, it's societal.
Because blackness is the agency of vice. We all know that good, lovely, angelic white people can't possibly be depraved or in any way amoral without some non-white agency teaching them to be immoral. So even if artists don't realize that they're doing that, when white people want to look clever or human or caring, the last thing they're going to do is surround themselves with a bunch of coons. I've never seen that in the history of entertainment where when a white person wants to look smart, they say, well, the 6 youngest kids in Britain to ever take GCSEs are all black. And they're all Nigerian, in fact. So let me surround myself with Nigerians, because Nigerians are synonymous with intelligence. You don't see that. But when people want to look ghetto or gangster or gully or down or slutty, then they surround themselves with black bodies. And then get defensive when you call it. Right? I've had this where I've called artists and I've been polite. I've not even been a bully, just being polite with artists when I don't really have a duty to be polite with artists and saying, hold on a minute. Why are white artists trying to sell themselves off black men killing each other or off sexualized images of black people? Which I expect, but then don't get sensitive about when people call you on it. But why are people trying to sell themselves off of that particular image of blackness? Why do they know that will resonate with their white audience? Because I don't see them, the same people who are happy to associate with black on black violence, I don't see them putting white racist violence in their videos and say, look, I'm going to sell, there's no coolness, there's no cachet in the Ku Klux Klan hanging men from trees and cutting their dicks off, right? That doesn't make you look particularly cool, and no one wants to deal with that. But, you know, young black men blowing each other's heads off just has a certain rhythm to it, doesn't it? Just because people listen to rap music or listen to reggae doesn't mean they respect black people, let's be clear. A white artist that respects this tradition and this culture would immediately recognize I'm white. There's some things I just can't do. See, a lot of white people feel that they should be the only people on earth that shouldn't have to be conscious of their colour. I have to be conscious all the time. If the police pull me over right now, right, or even when the police are behind me, as they were for ages yesterday, I'm conscious of who I am and what I am, right? And that's just the reality of the world. So white people saying, oh, but black people do it, it's bollocks, right? You have to be conscious of the fact, whether you like it or not, you are white, and you have a historical relationship to these people. I have to recognise that my dad's Jamaican, my mum's Scottish, and that brings with it whatever baggage it brings with it. But a lot of people feel that to be made conscious of their whiteness is racism. They feel that's where the racism is. How dare you point out the fact that I'm white and I'm doing it. Black male rappers do this all the time. Yes, they do, and they should be called on it. But what usually happens is people want to be naive to the larger political and social forces and say, well, I'm a poor person that made it, my life's all right, why couldn't you? Why didn't you just work harder? Why didn't you read more books? Why didn't you go to uni? The fact is the vast majority of people that play by the rules do not make it, do not end up doing what they love for a living. That social contract is not being fulfilled because we live in a society in which it cannot be fulfilled. The kids of people who go to Eton
are not going to compete on an even level, pound for pound, with me and you for jobs in the marketplace. They're going to run daddy's company. Because if they have to compete one-on-one with people who've made it from nothing, not had the privilege, not had the act, they're going to lose. It's obvious. I've trained harder than them. Of course they're going to lose. Other than, you know, the Stephen Hawkins of this world, who are just, you know, strange guys, just born crazily intelligent. Those freaks of nature that exist in every privileged, underprivileged, every racial group and religion. We don't know how those geniuses are born, but they exist. Other than those people, rich kids are not any smarter than anyone else.
When the people who pay the police's wages, us, regular people who pay the majority of the taxes in this country, when we protest against rich people, who protects them? If the police are public servants, right, if they're there to serve me and you, everyday people. Now, I'm not saying there are not some people who are good individuals in the police force. I'm not saying there are not some functions that the police serve that are useful. That's not what I'm saying. Obviously, if your child goes missing, having a function, a person you can call, an organised force with resources that can go and find your child, or at least, you know, if there are paedophiles in the world, you know, someone needs to deal with them. I'm not saying that everything police do is redundant. What I'm saying is their function, how they historically came into existence, and the primary function they serve is not to protect people like me and you, which is why when people like me and you are pissed off and we want to voice that, these are the barrier between us and the people they were invented to protect. So the killing of poor people generally, which the police have been permitted to get away with, but black men particularly, is symbolic. It's letting black men know, listen, you can run up your mouth all you want. You can have muscles and testosterone and run fast and sleep with women as much as you want. We can fear you, we can project that fear in the media, but ultimately we can kill you. The same people that you pay, the same people that everyone else can call to protect them. There are people in this country that actually pick up the phone to the police and feel protected. To me, that's amazing. Like that's a whole different world from the world I live in, because the last people I'd call if I was in trouble is the police. Because just in my world, you don't do that. And I'm an academic now, but from the background, you just don't call the police. It's something I can see. That's not how we deal with things. Not because we don't respect law and order, but because in our lives, the police have not been a force for justice. Most of us have family members, if not friends or uncles or cousins, who were strip searched and battered in the back of vans by the Special Patrol Group in the 70s and 80s. Many of us have family members that have been killed, you know. So our view of this is nothing new to us. And so
I don't believe capitalism is the ultimate form of human organisation, necessarily the most fair. And I don't believe in inherited class privilege. That's not to say I wouldn't help my children, but my main aim in life is not to set up some big business so my kids are millionaires so they can go sunbathing every year and go to private schools next to other rich kids. That's not how I think about the world, and that's not what my vision for the world. I understand why for a lot of people from tough backgrounds that becomes the way they see things. I don't ever want my kids to go through the stuff that I went through. And to a degree I share that. But I also don't really give a damn about living in a mansion and driving a Lamborghini. I wish I did, but I wish those things motivated me, because people would be more like, rah, do you know my man's driving this, or he lives there? But I'm just not that bothered about those things. There's things that I find more important, and I find inspiring other human beings more important. It's ironic that me seeing the world that way has brought me some degree of financial security. But I don't think, particularly for black people, if we understand the history of the way European capitalism developed, it's very dangerous for us to say this is, you know, the aim. The aim is to become just Warren Buffett in blackface, Donald Trump in blackface. You know, what's the source of the wealth of these people, these legitimate corporations that we're imitating? Where do the minerals come from that are in all of our products? I'm not going to name any individual corporations, not because I'm scared, it's just because I don't want to give them free advertising, and I'm a hypocrite. I use their products. But the coltan that's in all of the mineral-based products in this room, I know where it comes from. Most of it comes from the Congo. How many people have had to die for that to get there? So do I want to be like the companies that run this thing and be seen as a legitimate businessman that does nothing but exploit the poorer half or the poorer 2/3 of humanity? Or is there another way of doing trade? And actually, when we look at history, and this is not to be romantic, there are other ways of doing trade. For hundreds and hundreds of years, East Africa, the Middle East, and the so-called Far East, China, India, etc., had a semi-global system of trade. Was there forms of colonialism? Sure. Were there forms of forced servitude? Sure. Was it a paradise? Probably not. But for 600 or 700 years, we know for certain none of those civilizations were shattered by mutual interaction with one another. So on some level, they formed a degree of equilibrium in their trade and benefited from it. There's coins from China in Zimbabwe 1,500 years ago. We know these things, right? There's pieces of pottery from Lebanon in India There's Gujarati merchants found off the coast of Madagascar. In fact, Indonesians came all the way from Java, they weren't called Indonesians then, to Madagascar. And so some of the indigenous population of Madagascar, all the way there off the coast of East Africa, from Indonesia. So there's been global systems of trade and cooperation. No one's saying that business, and if you got yams and I got planting, I want some yams to go with my planting. Boom, let's do a swap. There's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is when I say, you got yams, I got planting, and I want all your yams, and furthermore, I'm going to kill you as well and take your yams. That's the issue. To an extent, certainly that is the global system of economic exploitation we live in. So for me, I would like to see more economically privileged people of colour challenging systems of economic exploitation as well, not acting like, oh, well, we made it, we're balling now, we got money. I get that kind of foolishness, but particularly in Britain and America, we're of African origin, and the wealth of Britain and America are dramatically linked to the exploitation of Africa and the Caribbean. So directly or indirectly, whether we like it or not, we kind of benefit from that. Where does Jamaica's aluminium go? Where does Ghana's cocoa go? Where do and fine, there might be an African elite that facilitates these things to a degree, but those that haven't, where have they ended up? Dead. So for me, it's also about us not reproducing the same bullshit in blackface. Because I'm not, I've got money, so I'm better than you, you know. What are you leaving your kids? Okay, but some of the people that have changed history, particularly for black people, have not been rich people. Malcolm X wasn't a rich man. Harriet Tubman wasn't a rich man. Martin Luther King wasn't a rich man. You know, I could give you a whole list of people that have done far more for mine and yours access to sit in this pretty room and talk foolishness, right? And they weren't rich people. So I think we got to stay away from just valuing people because of the things that they have and actually look what they're bringing to the table. Personally, that's not me romanticizing poverty, because I also agree, like, I'm not one of these fools that thinks it's romantic to be poor. It's not a pleasant experience, not having and being next to people that have everything. But what are we willing to do to not be in that scenario? Are we willing to do anything and F over anyone just to have a little bit of money in our pocket? I don't agree with that either.
People are just as classist and just as racist as they've ever been, but also just as unintelligent. Because the same people that will lecture us on this clearly don't know the history of the English language very well, right? The English language, Old English, was once upon a time considered the commoners, mucky, downgraded language. Nobody wanted to write in English. They wanted to write in Latin or French, because Latin and French were the middle class and upper class languages. And now English has some proudness to it. People are proud to speak English, right? But that wasn't the case 1,000 years ago. So people who don't know the history of the English language, don't know how the English language came to develop, don't know that slang, don't know that the makeup of everyday commoners' words has come into this lexicon that we now call English and massively informed this language. The whole language has had to change because of the prevalence that English gained with English power as opposed to French or Latin power. But that said, during that process, it was a constant dialogue. When an elite spoke Latin, English was a suppressed language. Now English is a language of primacy. All around the world, it suppresses, or when we had direct colonialism, the indigenous languages were suppressed. Languages of the poor are suppressed. And so
we're living through the fall of the empire. I genuinely think that we are living through the fall of Western empire as we know it. And I think that which is a good thing for humanity, even for the West itself. China, India, hopefully parts of Africa, though Africa's still lagging behind in some ways politically, particularly. Latin America, you know, we've had, even over the last 15, 20 years with the Bolivarian Revolution and all its implications, we've had some successful resistance to Euro-American imperialism. And China particularly is creating a difference in the world. This is not saying everything China does is wonderful. This is what happens, right? You can't have any nuanced view of people that are not white, right? So when you talk about European industrialism, people can say, oh, but it produced this, it produced moon travel. They can talk about all the good things it produced, and that's okay. Even though it was underpinned by slavery and mass class exploitation and genocidal rampage, there can be a nuanced view of what came out of it. That's cool. The moment you have a nuanced view of China or India or Iran, people are like, you're an extremist, you're sponsoring terrorism, you're this, you're that, whatever foolishness they want to come with, just because you don't think all yellow people or brown people or Muslims are bad. And so, not even the rise of China, the return of China, which has been the richest country on earth for most of the last 2,000 years. People who know history should know this. It's only really for 2 centuries that China wasn't richer than Europe, didn't have the highest GDP in the world. It's returning back to normal. What is abnormal is that 10% of humanity, Europe and their American and Australian descendants, dominated the rest of humanity for a brief period of time. That's now going to go back to normal, and Europe and America will have to sit down, or they're going to destroy everything. In my view, I don't think there's a middle ground. I think either we're going to have World War IV and everything's going to get blown up and everybody dead, or there's going to become, and ironically, this is one of the few things me and Adam Smith agree about. Adam Smith, the czar of capitalism, one of the things he did say is there may come a time when the savages basically have enough firepower that we can't commit genocide on them whenever we feel like it anymore. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he said. And thereby bring about an equilibrium in the world. And I actually feel like we're in a stage like that. Europe would love to exploit China the way it used to. Or the way it did for a brief period of time, because China was never colonizing the way Africa was, right? India is in sort of a, to be crude, somewhere between where Africa's at and where China's at. You know, India's just sent, it's one nation state, so that's very different. That's more similar to China. But it has more poverty in India than the 26 poorest African countries put together. But yet they've just put a satellite on Mars for a tenth of the price that NASA done it. What does that do to the world culturally when I start to think that scientists are Sikh men in turbans, not white men in coats? What does that do to me as a youth growing up in a village in India or in Nairobi or even in Paris, when the dominant image of scientists now becomes, but why shouldn't it be? India's got thousands of years of history of the pursuit of science, longer than Europe. So a stereotype that a scientist can only be one image or think one way or look one way is bullshit. And so to me, all of this is a resetting of the world. And sometimes we're so focused on what's wrong with the world, we don't look at the victories that were won. Transatlantic slavery was not supposed to end. It was made too expensive by resistance. Post-Haitian Revolution, it was no longer viable. It was going to end whatever happened.
See, when you talk about reparations for black people, everyone gets their backs up because of their guilt. Reparations is not new. It's an established legal principle. If I crash into you and it's my fault, I have to repair the damage, right? And even in a historical sense, there have been historical injustices where a legal case for reparations has been put forward and people have been paid, and even the descendants of those people have been paid benefits for harm caused. The Nazi Holocaust being the most obvious and prevalent and well-known example of that. So this isn't a new thing, and it isn't it's an established legal principle. And it's a struggle that has been going on for quite a while. Let's also be clear, when slavery ended, British slave owners were given reparations, £20 million reparations for their loss of property. When the Haitian Revolution had concluded and Haiti began to be an independent nation, once the French and the British and the Americans had all made up and got back on the same team, the French threatened to reinvade Haiti in 1825 and extorted from Haiti reparations for their loss of property and for their loss of colony and for their loss of their slaves, right? Money that Haitians, I believe, were laboring to pay back until 1947. So when people act like this is ancient history that doesn't have a direct legacy, they're of course having a very significant selective memory. The property that former slave owners obtained in the Caribbean has allowed them to still have, you go to the Caribbean today, you know, the 12 European descended families that are in Jamaica own most of the island, along with neo-colonial American tourist interests and a few small Chinese and Indian families that, to be fair to them, came to Jamaica and worked their way up and have a cultural incubation in a way that allowed them to rise in Jamaican society. And also, of course, because they didn't have there wasn't the same guilt complex attached to Chinese and Indian labour in the same way. There was certainly a greater degree of freedom. That's not to take anything away from them, because the Chinese and Indians didn't come to Jamaica as elites and slave owners and have worked their way up in the Caribbean generally. Not totally. Trinidad is a bit more complicated. But this kind of legal case is necessary and should be brought. But I am nervous sometimes. When we have governments in Caribbean islands that are not necessarily revolutionary governments, they're not people-led governments, it makes me nervous when some of those governments are bringing these kinds of cases. And I say that because if there is then a settlement made that's massively underwhelming, that is massively underestimated, right? Because at some point a settlement will be made. I believe that, because there will come a point in history where African power demands this sort of case to be brought in a particular way. It would be easier to settle with some sellout governments, pay them a little bit that you know they're going to piss up the wall, maintaining the current system of neocolonialism in the Caribbean anyway, than it would be when a genuine coalition of revolutionary governments come in, people-led governments come in, that intend to change the entire structure of the Caribbean's relationship to white capital. You don't want to pay those people any money, right? And you've never paid those people any money. And so what does concern me
a little bit is potentially that kind of a scenario coming, where we have academic and educated middle class and upper class Caribbeans bringing this kind of case, but with no genuine interest of serving the masses of their people. Just because they're black doesn't mean that they're going to be loyal to their people. History shows us this. And so I think the case is necessary, and these cases are necessary. I am just concerned that there would be an agenda, or maybe is an agenda, because it was quite widely covered. The case got quite a lot of press. Whenever something gets press, I'm like, why are they covering this now? You got UCL doing this investigation about which families receive money. Like I said, I could see there being a settlement, a massively underwhelming settlement given to people that we know, our mates basically. We give some money, and then we can all be guilt-free. We've paid reparations, right? But all we've done is given money to black elites in the Caribbean. Black elites didn't suffer. You understand? Black elites collaborated the whole time. They shouldn't get the money. They're not the people that suffered just because they're black, right? The black masses of the Caribbean are the people whose situation needs to change, because they're the people who are dealing directly with the legacy of slavery, and they're the people who suffered. So if Caribbean governments are not saying, do not outline in a plan of how they would use any reparations money, we would use this reparations money to fund X, to fund the redistribution of property in the Caribbean, to make sure industries like tourism, or in a country like Jamaica where we pay 50% or something bloody ridiculous out of our national budget to the IMF and the World Bank, to make sure that is done away with, to make sure the bauxite and the aluminium is used to serve the interests of the masses of Jamaican people. And I'm just taking Jamaica because it's the island I know most about, but the same principle should be applied to all the other islands. If the governments of the Caribbean are not coming with that kind of agenda, or at least the kind of agenda that someone like Aristide was coming with, poverty with dignity. He wasn't even coming with revolution. He wasn't saying overthrow the upper class, and he got taken out of power twice. Why? No one from the West is going to negotiate with giving Aristide the money. In fact, they blocked aid going to Haiti. All that aid we were giving to Haiti because the Haitian people had the cheek to elect a man that represented poor people, right? The aid was blocked. We all know this. So they won't even give the aid that was directly given to, you ain't gonna give reparations to no revolutionary government. So that's all that, not to put a downer on it, I think it's great that these cases are being brought. I think it's a necessary part of the historical process, but I think those of us that are not elitists need to monitor the ways in which cases are being brought in our name, because there is a history of people. There's black scumbags like there's scumbags in every group of people, right? And there's a history of people saying, oh, my heart bleeds, we've suffered so bad, give me some money, right? We've seen it in America. People who were campaigning for civil rights all during the 60s are now cheerleading for the White House, just because there's a brown man in the White House. What kind of bullshit is that? Do you understand? You know what I mean? Like, someone said, when black people were being lynched, it was a problem, but when America is the leading imperial power in the world, it's silence. We've got our brown man in the White House. So anyway, so for me, yeah, it's bittersweet.
Well, thanks very much for talking to Ceasefire today, Akala. It was fantastic having you on.
Thank you.
Fantastic.
Big up.